Luke had always been a quiet cowboy, the kind who worked more than he talked and kept his feelings tucked away like an old letter in a coat pocket. People in town respected him. They admired his loyalty, his strength, and the way he never complained about the hardships of ranch life. But on this particular morning, when he stepped off his horse and walked into town, everyone could tell something was terribly wrong. His shoulders were stiff, his face pale, and his eyes looked like they had seen a storm nobody else noticed. The owner of the general store, Mr. Harding, greeted him with a friendly smile at first, but the smile faded as soon as he saw Luke's expression. It was the kind of expression a man wore only when he had lost something precious. Luke stood there, silent, staring at the rows of canned goods like he had forgotten why he came. Mr. Harding walked over slowly and asked if everything was all right. Luke swallowed hard, opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He pressed his lips together and gave a small, broken shake of his head. It took him almost a full minute to speak. When he finally found the words, his voice sounded like dry leaves scraping across the ground. "I lost my wife today." The store went quiet. Even the old clock on the wall sounded louder as it ticked. Mr. Harding didn't know what to say. Luke's wife, Anna, had been sick for a long time, but she was strong and always smiling. People hoped she would recover. Luke hoped, too. Hope was the only thing he held on to during those long nights when she couldn't sleep and he sat beside her, holding her hand and whispering that she would get better soon. But all hopes had ended that morning. Mr. Harding stepped closer and placed a hand on Luke's shoulder, offering comfort the only way he knew. Luke nodded a little, but he didn't stay long. He didn't want people gathering around him, asking questions he wasn't ready to answer. He left the store quickly and walked outside, but he didn't go to his horse right away. He walked down the dusty road without knowing where his feet were taking him. His mind was clouded, and everything felt unreal, like the world had turned silent and empty. He reached the end of the road and kept walking. The sky was bright, but Luke felt cold. His steps carried him out of town, past the old wooden fence, and onto the narrow path that led toward the edge of the valley. He didn't look back. He just kept walking until he saw a small house with a porch shaded by tall trees. It was a house he had seen many times before, but never thought he would approach like this. Emily lived there. She was a young widow who had lost her husband 2 years ago. Her husband had been a kind man, someone everyone liked. When he passed away unexpectedly, Emily had faded into silence for months. People tried to comfort her, but grief is a road that only those who travel it understand. She learned to smile again eventually, but there was a quiet sadness in her eyes, a softness that came from knowing what it meant to lose someone you loved deeply. Emily had been sweeping her porch when she saw Luke walking toward her. At first, she thought he was just passing by, but then she realized he wasn't looking around, wasn't riding his horse, and wasn't carrying anything. He was just walking slowly, like a man carrying a heavy weight on his chest. She put down her broom and stepped forward. "Luke?" she called gently. Her voice made him stop. He lifted his head and looked at her, and for a moment she saw everything. His exhaustion, his shock, his pain, and a kind of helplessness that scared her because she remembered feeling the exact same way once. He tried to speak, but his throat tightened. She took a step closer, her face full of concern. "What happened?" she asked softly. Luke opened his mouth, but again no sound came. His breathing was uneven. Emily didn't need to hear the words. She already knew. Grief recognizes grief. She nodded slowly, her eyes filled with understanding, and whispered, "I'm so sorry." Luke lowered his gaze. He wasn't the kind of man who cried in front of others, but today everything inside him felt broken. Emily stepped aside and lifted her hand toward the porch. "Come sit," she said, her voice warm and steady. "You shouldn't be alone right now." He didn't argue. He walked up the wooden steps, moving as though each step weighed something. Emily offered him a chair, then went inside the house and returned with a glass of water. She placed it in front of him. Luke stared at it without touching it. The porch was quiet. The wind carried the scent of pine trees, and the shade offered a calmness Luke badly needed. Emily sat down across from him, giving him space but staying close enough so he wouldn't feel abandoned. She said nothing at first. She remembered how much she hated questions when she lost her husband. Everyone wanted to know how she was feeling, but nobody really understood. Silence had been the kindest companion. So she offered Luke the same silence now, supportive and patient. Minutes passed before Luke spoke. "She's gone," he said, his voice broken and soft. "Anna, she's gone." Emily's heart ached for him. She leaned forward just a little, not touching him but showing him she was there. "I'm truly sorry, Luke," she whispered. Luke stared at his hands. I thought we had more time." His voice cracked. "She fought so hard. Last night she told me to sleep for a while. I didn't want to, but she insisted. And when I woke up—" His words trailed off. Emily looked at him with calm, gentle eyes. She knew the guilt that came with losing someone. The feeling that maybe you failed, even when you didn't. She understood that pain better than anyone. He took a deep breath, his chest rising unevenly. "I should have stayed awake. I should have held her hand till the end." He closed his eyes, and Emily could tell he was fighting tears he didn't want to show. "You did what you could," she said softly. "Sometimes love means trusting the other person's wishes. Anna didn't want you to see her last moment because she cared for you." Luke shook his head slightly, not ready to believe her yet, but her words planted something like comfort. They sat together quietly. A few birds chirped somewhere in the trees. The wind brushed against the porch railing. Luke felt the kind of exhaustion that came from crying without tears, hurting without a sound. Emily finally spoke again, her voice low but steady. "When my husband passed, I felt the same guilt. I thought I should have done more. I thought maybe if I had stayed awake longer or prayed harder, things would have changed." She looked down at her hands for a moment. "But grief isn't something we can control. We care, we try, we hope, and sometimes life chooses another path." Her words touched Luke more than she realized. He opened his eyes and looked at her. For the first time since morning, he felt a tiny bit less alone. Emily wasn't trying to fix his pain. She wasn't rushing him. She wasn't telling him to be strong. She was simply there, understanding, listening, offering the kind of comfort that doesn't demand anything in return. Luke finally lifted the glass of water and took a slow sip. His hands trembled slightly. Emily watched quietly, making sure he didn't feel judged. He set the glass down and whispered, "I didn't know where else to go." Emily smiled softly, a sad, gentle smile. "You came here because I know what this feels like," she said, "and you're safe here." Luke nodded, and something inside him loosened. He wasn't ready to smile, but he wasn't collapsing either. Being on her porch, feeling her quiet presence, gave him a place to rest his pain, even if just for a little while. They remained there until the sun began to slide down behind the hills. The warm glow touched the porch, painting everything in soft gold. Luke stared at the horizon, thinking of Anna, thinking of the life they had shared, and thinking of the emptiness waiting for him at home. Emily didn't rush him. She didn't encourage him to speak if he didn't want to. She simply stayed by his side, the way she wished someone had stayed for her when she needed it most. Luke drew in a long, shaky breath. "Thank you for letting me sit here," he said quietly. Emily shook her head gently. "You don't have to thank me," she replied. "Sometimes the porch is the only place where hearts can breathe." Luke looked at her for a moment, seeing in her eyes the same kind of hurt he felt, but also a strength he needed. He realized he had come to the one person who truly understood his loss. And as the sky darkened, he allowed himself to just sit there, not as a cowboy who needed to be strong, but as a grieving husband who needed a moment of kindness. Emily didn't know what the next days would bring for him, but she knew this moment mattered. She wasn't taking his pain away, but she was helping him carry it, just a little. And for the first time since morning, Luke felt like he wasn't walking through his grief alone. Luke returned to Emily's porch the next day, moving slowly like a man whose body was present, but whose heart was still searching for steady ground. The night before had been the longest night of his life. The house felt too quiet. Every corner reminded him of Anna, her sewing basket, her favorite chair, the blanket she had made last winter. All of it sat untouched. Luke had walked around the house without purpose, touching things gently, as if expecting her to return and scold him for worrying too much. But she didn't return. The silence pressed heavily on him until it became unbearable. At sunrise, he saddled his horse and let it carry him down the familiar dirt path without thinking. He didn't plan to go to Emily's house, but his heart somehow led him back to the only place where he had felt a little less broken yesterday. Emily had been sitting on her porch steps, tying the laces of her worn boots when she saw Luke riding toward her. She stood up immediately, concern softening her face. She recognized the same hollow look she once carried in her own eyes during her first week of grief, the kind of look no sleep could chase away. Luke stopped in front of her porch and slid off the horse, his movements slow and heavy. He nodded in greeting, but it was a small, tired gesture. Emily stepped forward. "You didn't sleep well," she said softly. Luke shook his head. "Couldn't stay inside," he replied, rubbing the back of his neck. "Everything in that house reminds me of her. It feels like her laughter is still there." "But she isn't." Emily nodded with gentle understanding. "It's the hardest part. Your heart waits for a sound that doesn't come anymore." He swallowed, his throat tightening. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. Emily didn't push him. She simply motioned to the porch. "Come sit," she said, just as she had the day before. "The morning air is kinder than the walls inside." Luke followed her and sat down in the same chair he had used yesterday. Emily brought him a warm cup of tea. He wrapped his hands around it, letting the heat warm his fingers. He didn't drink at first. He just stared at the steam rising gently from the cup. After a few minutes, he said, "People in town look at me differently now. They talk in quiet voices like they're afraid to say the wrong thing." "They're trying," Emily said, sitting across from him. "But they don't understand this kind of loss, not unless they've lived it." Luke nodded slowly. "Yesterday you didn't look at me with pity," he said quietly. "You just understood." Emily offered a small, understanding smile. "Because I've walked this path. I know what it takes from you." Luke breathed out a shaky sigh. "I feel strange. Like I'm here, but I'm not. Like my chest is too heavy to breathe properly." "That's grief," she said gently. "It feels like it steals the air from your lungs." Luke looked at the trees swaying lightly in the morning breeze. "Anna was my whole world, Emily. She was my peace. She was the voice that calmed me at the end of a long day. And now, I don't know how to move forward." Emily's eyes softened. She leaned forward slightly. "You don't have to move forward yet. Right now, you just need to survive the day, one breath at a time." Her words struck a deep chord inside him. For a long moment, he just listened to the rustling of leaves. The sound reminded him of quiet afternoons with Anna, when she would sit on their porch sewing while he fixed a broken saddle. Simple moments, moments he would give anything to relive. After a long pause, Luke finally spoke again. "I couldn't look at her empty chair this morning. I walked past it, but I couldn't look." Emily nodded. The empty things hurt the most. They do, he whispered. Emily rested her hands in her lap and took a slow breath. When my husband passed, she began softly, I couldn't sleep in our bed for weeks. It felt wrong to be there without him. I slept on the sofa until one day I finally understood that the bed wasn't him. The chair isn't Anna. The things left behind are only things. The memories are what matter. Luke thought about that. It wasn't something he could accept yet, but he understood the truth in her words. He finally took a sip of the tea. It warmed his throat, and for the first time since yesterday morning, he felt something close to comfort. Emily watched him quietly, her presence calm and steady. She didn't rush him into conversation. She let him take his time, giving him the space to speak when he was ready. After a moment, Luke asked softly, How did you make it through those first weeks? Emily smiled sadly. Mostly by breaking down, she admitted. I cried a lot, I felt lost, but every day I tried to do one small thing. Sometimes it was opening the windows, sometimes it was cooking a simple meal. Sometimes it was stepping onto this porch just to breathe fresh air, and slowly, very slowly, the days stopped feeling like a storm I couldn't escape. Luke listened carefully. Did you ever feel like you were failing them by moving on? All the time, she replied quietly. But grief doesn't mean forgetting. Healing doesn't erase love. It just makes room for your heart to keep living. Luke lowered his eyes. I don't know if I can do that. Not yet. Not yet, Emily agreed. And that's perfectly fine. There was a long, peaceful silence. Emily let the quiet sit between them, knowing silence could be its own kind of comfort. Luke watched the morning light stretch across the wooden planks of the porch, painting thin gold lines. He breathed slowly, his chest still heavy, but not as painfully tight as before. Emily eventually stood. Not abruptly, but gently. Would you like some food? She asked. You probably haven't eaten much. Luke shook his head. I'm not hungry. Emily didn't push. She simply said, If you change your mind, I'll make something light. You need strength, even if you don't feel it now. Luke appreciated her calmness. She didn't force, didn't overwhelm him, didn't remind him of things he wasn't ready to face. She simply created a space where he didn't have to pretend. A few minutes later, he whispered something she almost didn't hear. Last night I talked to her. Or maybe I was talking to myself. I don't know. I told her I didn't know how to live without her. Emily's heart softened. That's normal. Talking helps. Speak to her whenever you need. Love doesn't vanish just because someone is gone. He nodded slowly, letting her words settle. Anna used to tell me that if anything happened to her, I should keep living. She wanted me to smile again, but I can't imagine that. Emily looked at him with quiet compassion. You don't have to imagine the future right now. Just stay here for a bit. Let your heart rest. Luke's breathing deepened slightly. For the first time all day, he felt a small part of his weight lift, not gone, but lighter. Emily stood and went inside for a moment. She returned with a quilt and placed it on the back of his chair. It might get chilly soon, she said softly. Luke touched the quilt gently. You didn't have to do that. I know, she replied with a soft smile. But grief is cold, and sometimes warmth helps. Luke's eyes filled with quiet gratitude. He didn't say a word, but Emily saw the thankfulness in the way he looked at her. They spent the rest of the morning talking slowly, quietly. Luke shared stories about Anna, how she loved planting flowers around the house, how she laughed at his bad jokes, how she always hummed softly when she cooked. Emily listened, encouraging him to remember the beauty without drowning in the pain. Every story he told felt like opening a door in his heart, letting fresh air in. pain came with the memories, but so did love. And Emily helped him understand that remembering wasn't the same as hurting. As the afternoon sun warmed the porch, Luke leaned back slightly, feeling his chest loosen. Emily's gentle presence had begun to undress his pain, layer by layer, not through touch, but through understanding, patience, and kindness. By the time the sky started turning soft orange, Luke felt something he hadn't felt since the morning Anna passed, a fragile sense of steadiness. He looked at Emily quietly. "Thank you," he said again, but this time with deeper meaning. "For listening, for not letting me fall apart alone." Emily shook her head gently, her eyes warm. "You're not alone, Luke. Not here." And in that moment, Luke knew he had found the one place where his grief could breathe without crushing him. A simple wooden porch, held together by shade, silence, and the understanding of a woman who knew exactly how to help a broken heart rest. The days that followed moved slowly, like a long road stretching ahead without any clear end. Luke woke each morning with the same heavy feeling in his chest. But something had changed since the first day he walked onto Emily's porch. He now had a place where his pain didn't feel so unbearable. He didn't visit to escape his grief. He visited because sharing the quiet with someone who understood made it just a little easier to breathe. Every morning, after finishing the bare minimum of chores on his ranch, Luke found himself riding toward Emily's house. He didn't come because he wanted distraction. He came because Emily offered something far more important, a safe space where he didn't have to pretend to be strong. She never asked him to move on or hide his feelings. She simply listened and shared her own journey, helping him see that he wasn't losing his mind. Grief was heavy, but it wasn't permanent. On the third morning, Luke arrived earlier than usual. Emily was sweeping her porch again, small dust clouds rising with each gentle strike of the broom. She looked up when she heard the horse and smiled kindly, not surprised to see him. "You're up early," she said softly, leaning the broom against the railing. Luke dismounted and tied his horse to the fence. "Couldn't stay in bed. Woke up before sunrise." Emily nodded. "That's how it was for me, too. Sleep comes in pieces." He walked up the steps and sat down in his usual chair. Emily brought him tea, and he wrapped his hands around the cup, appreciating the warmth. They sat quietly for a while, listening to the morning birds calling from the trees. "Emily," he said finally, "how did you handle people telling you to stay strong? I hear that a lot now. It feels like they want me to hide everything." Emily smiled sadly. "I remember those words. People think strength means not crying or not breaking down. But strength is waking up each day, even when your heart feels empty. Strength is breathing when it hurts. You're already strong, Luke, more than you realize." He looked at her with tired eyes. "Sometimes I feel like I'm failing her, like I shouldn't be sitting here, like I should be home. Suffering, I guess." Emily shook her head. "Grief doesn't follow rules, Luke. You don't honor someone by punishing yourself. You honor them by remembering them with love, not by drowning in guilt." Luke took a deep breath. Her words settled into him slowly, like seeds that needed time before they could grow. He didn't fully believe them yet, but he trusted her enough to hold the thought in his mind. A little later, after finishing his tea, Luke stood and looked at the loose porch steps. "These steps wobble," he said, noticing the way the wood dipped slightly when he stepped on it. Emily laughed gently. "They've been like that for a while. I haven't had the time or tools to fix them." Luke rolled up his sleeves. "I'll take care of it." "You don't have to," she said. "I know," Luke replied, "but I want to." He began examining the steps, knocking lightly on the boards to find the weak spots. Emily watched from her chair, amused by his sudden interest in porch repairs. She knew he wasn't just fixing steps. He was searching for something to keep his hands busy, to keep his mind from sinking into the painful thoughts that sometimes swallowed him. She quietly went inside and brought out a small box of old nails, handing it to him. "This is all I have." Luke smiled slightly. "It'll do." He spent the next hour repairing the steps with careful hands. The sound of hammering filled the air, blending with the soft rustling of leaves. Emily watched him with a warm feeling growing in her heart. There was something healing about seeing him work, something steady, strong, familiar. It reminded her of how her husband used to fix things around their home. She didn't feel sadness watching Luke. Instead, she felt a sense of peace knowing her porch had become a place where someone could heal. When Luke finished, the steps no longer wobbled. He wiped sweat from his forehead and sat back down, breathing a little heavier but looking calmer. "They're safe now," he said. Emily smiled brightly. "Thank you. They look wonderful." "It was nothing," he said, but she knew it meant something to him. As the sun climbed higher, Luke began sharing more stories about Anna. Not the painful ones, but the warm, gentle memories he had been too afraid to speak aloud before. He talked about how Anna used to hum when she cooked, how she always insisted on feeding stray cats, and how she would leave tiny notes for him in his pockets. Emily listened with full attention, smiling softly at the little details. "She sounds like she was full of kindness," Emily said. "She was," Luke replied, eyes softening. "She had a way of making everything feel lighter, even the worst days." Emily nodded. "That kind of love stays with you, Luke. It doesn't disappear." Luke took a slow breath. "I'm scared of losing the memories." "You won't," she said gently. Talking about her keeps her close. His gaze dropped, touched by her words. For the first time since Anna's passing, he didn't feel guilty speaking her name. Emily made it feel natural, safe even. Later in the afternoon, Emily suggested a small activity. "Sometimes writing helps," she said. "You don't have to show anyone, just write something you remember. A moment, a thought, a feeling." Luke raised an eyebrow. "Writing isn't really my strong suit." "It doesn't have to be perfect," she said softly. "It just has to be honest." Luke didn't agree right away, but he didn't argue either. He took a small notebook Emily offered and stared at the blank page. After a few minutes, his pencil began to move slowly, writing a simple sentence about the first day he met Anna. He wrote in short lines, pausing often, but he kept going. When he finished, he closed the notebook without reading it. "It felt strange," he said quietly. "Strange good or strange bad?" Emily asked gently. "Strange good," he admitted, "like I was letting something out." "That's what healing feels like," she said. Luke looked at her, gratitude shining quietly in his eyes. She wasn't just giving him comfort. She was guiding him, showing him small steps he could take toward breathing again. As the days passed, their conversations grew deeper and more honest. Luke asked her questions about her own journey through grief. Emily shared stories she had kept inside for years. She talked about the loneliness that had once filled her home, the nights she cried until she couldn't cry anymore, and the slow, steady return of peace. Luke listened with respect. Her honesty helped him see grief in a new light, not as a punishment, but as a long path that could eventually lead to something gentler. Emily noticed that Luke smiled sometimes, small, quiet smiles, but real ones. She also noticed that he didn't always walk with his shoulders hunched. His voice grew steadier, and though his sadness remained, it no longer swallowed him whole. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Luke said, "Your porch saved me." Emily looked at him with soft, emotional eyes. "I don't know about that," she whispered. "I do," Luke insisted. I don't think I would have made it through the last few days without coming here." Emily's breath caught for a second. "Then I'm glad you did." He looked around the porch, the patched steps, the old rocking chair, the quiet trees swaying gently. Then he looked at Emily. Her presence wasn't loud or dramatic. It was steady, warm, and patient, the way sunlight feels when it slips into a cold room. "You helped me breathe again," Luke said softly, "and I didn't think that was possible." Emily lowered her gaze, touched deeply. "You helped me too," she said. "More than you know." Luke tilted his head. "Me?" She nodded. "I thought my heart had closed after my husband passed. I thought it had no strength left. But when you came here, something opened again. Not in a romantic way. Just a feeling that life still means something." Luke felt that quietly powerful truth sink into him. The porch wasn't just saving him, it was saving them both. As night settled in, Luke stood to leave. Emily walked with him to the steps he had repaired earlier. "You did a fine job," she said softly, tapping the wood with her foot. Luke gave a small smile. "Glad something I did today held steady." Emily looked at him gently. "You held steady too, Luke." "That matters." He nodded, touched by her words, then mounted his horse. Before riding away, he looked back at her one last time. "See you tomorrow?" Emily smiled, warm and soft. "Yes, tomorrow." And as he rode home under the quiet evening sky, Luke felt something new, a calm warmth spreading slowly through his chest. It wasn't the end of grief. It wasn't happiness. It was something in between, a fragile, hopeful step toward healing. And he knew he wouldn't have found it without Emily's porch, her understanding heart, and the quiet strength she shared with him every day. Weeks passed as gently as falling leaves, each one carrying a little more light into Luke's heart. The sharp sting of grief softened into a quieter ache, and though he still missed Anna with every breath, he no longer felt crushed under the weight of her absence. Something inside him was healing, not through forgetting, but through remembering with love instead of pain, and much of that healing came from the time he spent on Emily's porch. Luke had grown so used to the porch that even his horse seemed to know the path by heart now. Nearly every afternoon, after finishing his chores, Luke rode over the hill and followed the worn trail to Emily's little house. He didn't always arrive with words to say. In fact, some days, he simply sat in silence. But Emily understood the silence. She knew silence could speak louder than any sentence, especially for someone carrying the memory of a great loss. Emily always welcomed him without question. She would bring him tea, or sometimes a small plate of fresh biscuits if she had baked earlier. Luke never asked for anything, but she offered out of kindness, and he accepted because her kindness felt honest, not forced. One day, Emily was planting flowers near the porch when Luke arrived. Her hands were covered in soil, and there was a thoughtful expression on her face. Luke stepped off his horse and walked over, watching her gently place the small plants into the earth. "What are you planting?" he asked quietly. "Marigolds," she said. "My husband liked them. I used to plant them every year for him. I stopped for a while after he passed." She paused, brushing dirt from her fingers. "But this year, I felt ready." Luke nodded slowly. He understood the meaning behind her words. Planting something again was not just gardening. It was hope. It was a sign that life still had small beginnings waiting to grow. He knelt beside her, careful not to disturb her work. "Can I help?" She smiled warmly. "I'd like that." They worked together in the soft afternoon sun, planting marigolds in neat little rows. The scent of fresh earth filled the air. Luke found comfort in doing something simple, something that didn't require him to understand pain or explain his heart. Working with Emily, brought a quiet peace he hadn't realized he needed. After they finished, they sat on the porch steps and admired their work. The flowers stood brightly in the soil, promising color once they bloomed. "They look good there," Emily said softly. "They do," Luke replied. "Feels peaceful." Emily nodded. "Sometimes healing begins with little moments like this, planting something, fixing something, sitting with someone." Luke breathed in deeply, letting the warm air fill his lungs. "You've given me more than you know," he said quietly. Emily looked at him gently. "And you've given me strength too." Luke frowned slightly. "Me? How?" Before answering, Emily folded her hands in her lap. Her voice carried softness, but also sincerity. "When my husband passed, I didn't think I could ever open my heart again. Not for love, not for friendship, not even for simple human connection. I closed myself off. I survived, but I didn't live. Then you came here and you shared your pain with me. It reminded me that I wasn't alone in my grief. It made me want to help you, and in helping you, I somehow helped myself." Luke stared at her, deeply moved. His eyes softened, and he felt something warm unfolding in his chest, gentle, steady, and deeply human. "I'm glad," he whispered. Emily smiled slightly. "So am I." The days continued like this, steady, warm, slow, but meaningful. People in town began to notice the change in Luke. He walked with a calmer posture. His shoulders weren't as heavy. His eyes weren't as clouded with pain. He worked with more patience, focused, but not lost in his thoughts. Some of the old ranchers commented on the change, saying things like, "It's good to see you stand straighter," or "You look more like yourself again." Luke didn't explain the reason. He didn't need to. The truth wasn't complicated. He was healing, step by step, on a quiet porch with a woman who understood grief better than anyone he had ever met. One late afternoon, Luke arrived with a small basket in his hands. Emily had been sitting on the porch reading a book when she saw him coming. She stood up and greeted him with a curious smile. "What did you bring?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. Luke held the basket out. "A few apples from my orchard. Thought you might like them." Emily's face brightened. "These look wonderful." She lifted an apple, turning it gently. "Thank you, Luke." He shrugged softly. "Just thought you'd enjoy something fresh." Emily placed the basket inside, then returned to sit beside him. "You've been thoughtful lately," she said gently. Luke chuckled, a small, honest sound. "Just trying to return the kindness you've given me." Emily looked at him carefully. "Kindness doesn't need returning. It just needs to be shared." She paused. "But it means a lot." They sat quietly for a while, listening to the wind whisper through the branches of the trees. Luke leaned back slightly, letting his shoulders relax. The porch had become a second home, one not filled with the shadow of Anna's absence, but with a gentle comfort that allowed his memories to remain without overwhelming him. As the sun began to lower, painting the sky with shades of orange and soft gold, Emily glanced at him. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," Luke replied softly. Emily hesitated before speaking. "When you think of Anna now, do you still feel the same sharp pain?" Luke considered the question. He let his eyes drift toward the horizon, thinking carefully. "I still feel the loss," he said honestly. "That hasn't vanished, and I don't expect it to. But the pain, it's changed. It's softer now, less crushing." He paused. "Being here, talking to you, remembering Anna without breaking, it's helped." Emily's eyes softened. "I'm glad you can breathe again." Luke nodded. "I didn't think I ever would." Emily looked down at her hands, then back at Luke with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever worry that healing means forgetting?" Luke shook his head slowly. "No, not anymore. I realize now that healing isn't forgetting. It's learning to carry the love in a gentler way. Emily smiled, a tender, emotional smile that said she understood deeply. As twilight settled in, Luke stood and walked toward the porch railing. Emily followed him, standing a short distance away. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of fresh earth from the marigolds they planted days earlier. Luke turned to her with something soft and sincere in his eyes. "Emily," he said quietly, "you've walked with me through the hardest part of my life." "And you walked through mine," she replied with equal sincerity. Luke took a slow breath, gathering his thoughts. "I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to know that your presence changed everything for me." Emily's heart warmed at his words. "And you changed things for me too, Luke." They held each other's gaze for a long, peaceful moment. There was no rush, no pressure, no unspoken expectations, just a deep understanding born from shared pain and gentle healing. Finally, Luke stepped down from the porch and walked to his horse. Before mounting, he pulled something from his saddlebag. Emily watched curiously as he approached her again, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers, simple, delicate, freshly picked. "For you," he said quietly. "To thank you for giving me a place to breathe." Emily looked at the flowers, then at Luke. Her eyes glistened, not with sorrow, but with warm emotion. She took the bouquet gently, her fingers brushing his for a moment. "Thank you," she whispered. "These are beautiful." "So are the days you helped me get through," Luke said, voice low and sincere. Emily pressed the flowers to her heart. "You helped me too, Luke, more than I ever thought anyone could." He nodded, touched beyond words. Then he mounted his horse, holding the reins loosely. "See you tomorrow?" he asked softly. Emily smiled, soft, hopeful, and full of peace. "Yes," she said, "tomorrow and the day after, for as long as you need." Luke smiled gently, a smile that carried healing and quiet strength. "And for as long as you want." Emily felt her heart warm at his words. "I want that," she said simply. Luke turned his horse and began riding home under the deepening twilight sky. The world felt different, not lighter, but steadier. He had found peace not by replacing his past, but by allowing himself to keep living in the present. And he knew he wasn't walking forward alone. Back on the porch, Emily held the wildflowers close, feeling something she had thought she lost forever: hope. A gentle, soft hope that came from two hearts learning how to heal side by side. And though neither of them said it out loud, both knew the truth. The porch that had once held grief had become the place where life began again.